The U.S. claims this was a spy balloon. That's what we've heard all along in the last, 24, 48 hours. Aren't most countries, especially China, far better equipped to spy on us with much better technology than a balloon?
I don't think it's quite right to say that a balloon is a primitive surveillance asset. They have satellites. I don't think they're as good as our satellites, but there are high-tech balloons at 60 to 70 to 80,000 feet that can get clearer pictures than satellites can. They move slower. And they're kind of used as experimental platforms to see how much weight they would tolerate when they go over a target, because there has been reports that people are experimenting with them as weapon system. So when we were told that the platform may have been as large as 2 buses, I think that's a little bit excessive just for cameras and radar transmission appurtenances. And it may be they were putting a lot of weight on that in expectation at some point they could modify the system to carry some type of weapon, either an explosive device or an electrical outage device or something along that nature. So I don't think the military would discount it. They had to shoot it down because they were under enormous pressure from the public, from you, the media, who had covered it pretty extensively, and from the opposition in Congress that was demanding action. And I think they regret now that they didn't take it down when it got over the Aleutians.
What is the greatest complication to U.S.-China relations that the balloon incident could cause, potentially?
Well, I'll be a little bit contrarian here. I think it's very dangerous for the Chinese to get the wrong impression that the United States either cannot or will not protect its own sovereignty. And I think when they look at us and we're in Ukraine protecting the sovereignty of borders in Ukraine, and we have an open border in the south, and we let people come into our airspace, they will draw the wrong conclusion that we either cannot or won't stop them, and that will encourage them to be more adventurous. So it saves lives throughout history if you're firm and clear about what red lines are and you mean to enforce them. Then everybody understands what the rules are. Wars start when somebody doesn't know what the rules are and they try to take advantage. But if we insist to the Chinese that you cannot do this in the same manner, we wouldn't do it to you, I think they'll get the message.
A weather balloon, as China claims, drifted off course. This seems very random. Could there be more behind this?
Oh, I don't think it's a matter of question. There is more behind it. It was a surveillance balloon. Chinese have used them in the past. They've destroyed drones of ours in international waters. They've taken down a U.S. plane in international airspace in 2001 and captured the crew for, I think, for 11 days. So they've done this before. And the Pentagon was confused. They said they didn't know quite why it was here, whether it was a weather balloon. They were worried about people, the debris, and it wouldn't be as effective as satellites. I think all of that was not accurate. That, in other words, people have argued that the slow-moving weather balloon, quote unquote, has some efficacy that may be superior to satellites, or it could be a platform that you would experiment later on with a weapon system on it, or more importantly, it could be testing whether we have any deterrence left. In other words, they want to see our reaction to it vis-a-vis some envisioned invasion in the future of Taiwan or something.
As the expert that you are, and due to your experience and history and background and research in this area, did you know exactly what this was when you first saw it?
Well, yeah, I think anytime that China sends any device over the sovereign territory of any country, we know what it is, because this has happened before. We had a plane in 2001 international airspace that they took down and almost destroyed it, and then they took it apart and dismantled it and did not give it back to us. They illegally held the crew for 11 days. They repeatedly destroyed American drones that were in international waters, not all of them spy devices. So everybody expects that. And I think one of the subtext of this whole enterprise is they were trying to show people in their environment, the Japanese, the South Koreans, the Philippines, the Taiwanese, the Australians, our allies. They were saying to them, do you really think the United States is going to protect you in a crisis when they can't even stop one of our balloons going right over this continental United States, and they didn't do anything for a long time? Is this the kind of allies that you can count on? You'd be much better changing your alliances and relying on somebody like us in your immediate environment than counting on a long-distance absentee ally like the United States. That's more typical of their behavior, I think, and that would best explain the ideology of why they took this gambit. I don't think they're afraid of us at all. And they expected it. They expected this to happen, and they will cry crocodile tears and complain and whine, but secretly they're delighted that it lasted this long.
Very interesting. And this is just based off of what the international community is saying, right? These are what conversations are happening right now, and this is what
Yes.
things that you've heard and read about.
Yes. Well, the international community knows that you can't have a rules-based order when one country sends in devices over the sovereign airspace against international law of another. So publicly, they are, or they're not going to condemn too loud because China is a great power, but they're going to criticize this. Privately, I'm afraid they're shocked, and they're thinking the only antithesis to China, the only power that has the ability to keep us free from Chinese bullying is the United States. And why in the world would the United States allow China to provoke it in such an extreme fashion? And what does that mean for our collective security in terms of NATO or in terms of our Pacific friends that rely on the United States deterrent to stop China? We are much, even in our decline, we're much more powerful than China. But China looks at a very powerful country and says, if I were that country, I would be doing a lot more, and therefore they're afraid of their own power. I know that seems perverse, and we don't think that way, but I think the Communist Party leadership in Beijing has shown that it does in the past.
One final question. Do you think Americans should be fearful of their surveillance, or do you think we should be afraid that China will continue to do this again in the near future?
I think we need to be very vigilant, because I was a little upset about the official responses about worrying about debris falling in Montana, where there's 5 people per square mile or 1 person per square mile in the Aleutians. That wasn't the real problem. And then I think more people were worried that unfortunately they would gain more information that would be harmful to their security than some particles falling out of the sky from a balloon. So I think the administration should have come clean very early on and saying we have to protect the integrity of our deterrent, which is a military basis in the northern and western part of the country. And we don't let adversaries come over and photograph our missile silos under any circumstances, because that's central to your security, you American. But they didn't do that, and they only changed course when they were under public pressure. And there's a State of the Union coming up, and I don't think the president wanted to give that address and then be questioned later on why he didn't mention why he had not shot down this balloon. So it makes it a little easier for him to get that out of the public discussion by the time of this State of the Union. I think the tiniest balloon teaches us that China doesn't really respect international law. They violently, they ostensibly, explicitly, all the time violate international law because they don't really consider that it exists. And their way of thinking, the strong dictate to the weak and the weak obey as they must. So we better wake up about copyrights, patents, dumping, currency manipulation, the Uyghurs and slave labor, the bullying of our allies like South Korea and Taiwan and Japan and Australia and the Philippines, and the Silken Road projects that they use to extort overseas. They have an agenda, and that agenda does not include us as the major power in the world. They see us as in decline and a subsidiary that they can dictate to. And why we are still stronger economically, culturally, socially, militarily than they are, we're in a position to apprise them that what they're doing is very dangerous.